OG Rose here, and today we're going to be talking about a paper called Through Nothing We Know. And the general idea of the paper is that most of the time we are understanding the world we are in through ideas. The idea of the chair, the idea of the trees, the idea of my wife, the idea of the forest, and so on. And it's kind of strange, right? Because ideas are things, and yet they're not things. You know, the idea of chair is a thing, and yet it's not equivalent to the thing that is a chair. And so I'm always understanding the world and making sense of it through these kind of nothings. But I don't want to call them nothings. I want to call them like nothing, N-O in parentheses, nothings. So it's kind of this, it's almost like there are things, there are non-things, and then there are no things with the N-O in parentheses. And yet the very moment you kind of think about ideas, you have to experience them as things that are not there, as nothings without the parentheses. And so, if you're someone who spends a lot of time thinking, then you're habituating yourself to existing in things that feel like they're not there, that you experience as not being there. And it's very easy to forget that ideas are in fact things, that they aren't nothings. And so you become habituated to nothing. And I wonder if this is why a lot of thinkers are nihilists, actually. They don't believe in anything. They believe in nothing because they spend all their time habituated toward an experience of things that are not there. They are there mentally, but they seem not to be there experientially. There are other things like inanimate objects, for example. We have animate objects like human beings and animals. We have inanimate objects like rocks and cliffs. But then there's this third category of things like air conditioners or houses or chairs, which exist because an entity that is animated created them. So there are parentheses, inanimate objects. And yet we tend to think of air conditioners as being inanimate in the same way a rock is. And that can lead us to forget that the majority of stuff that surrounds us in the day is not merely inanimate in the same way that a cliff is inanimate, but it's inanimate because an animated person, a human being, created it, like a rock, like a road, like a car. And that being the case, we can actually come to be habituated to thinking of the majority of life as being unconscious, as being something that is a result of unconscious processes, when the high majority of stuff around us is a result of conscious processes, is a result of animation. And I think it's very consequential because you start to think that mind or consciousness does not play a big role in life. It becomes much easier to reduce the majority of to reduce life to being a result of non-conscious processes, which, at the end of the day, maybe it is, but it's important to realize that we are habituated to not realize how big of a deal consciousness, mind, animation is in making the world around us. And, another thing, to get into the paper, The Truism, the Rational, is the moment we think about something, we tend to think about it as rationally, or following logic. But often what makes rationality possible is something that ultimately cannot be reduced to rationality. If I think it's going to rain today, and I go outside with an umbrella and it doesn't rain, does that mean I was irrational? Well, no, because I had reason to believe it was going to rain. I was rational and wrong, but that doesn't mean I was irrational. And in a way, the initial premise of thinking that it was going to rain is something I almost want to call unrational. It's based on some evidence. But at the end of the day, it's something that you assent to almost by faith, almost by probability. So it's not irrational or rational, it's kind of unrational. But since the moment you think about something, you think about it as either being rational or irrational, you come to think of the foundations of rationality as ergo being irrational, and therefore all of rationality as irrational. That rationality is an expression ultimately of an irrationality. And that's very problematic because we're missing the category of unrational, which I'm going to call true in another paper, that the rational is relative to what you believe is true, but the true cannot ultimately be reduced to the rational, even though rationality is what makes it intelligible. So the paper just has three examples here of no things, parentheses, no things, unrational, you could put, irrational with the IR in parentheses, and inanimate with the IN in parentheses. And it wants to create these third categories because I guess in a Derridarian deconstructionist tradition, there's a certain dichotomy I think needs to be deconstructed, that failing to deconstruct it and failing to also realize that our way of experiencing the world sort of misleads us into thinking that the idea of chair is a nothing as opposed to a no thing, that the experience of a air conditioner is going to make it an inanimate object like a clip as opposed to a parentheses inanimate object, and how our experience of truths or premises as rational leads us to think that the foundations of rationality are rational, or to experience them as irrational, and therefore all of rationality is an expression merely of an ideology, maybe, and power. And then you get into Foucault and some of these concerns that you have in sociology today, which are valid, but that would take another recording. So anyway, the paper is called Through Nothing We Know. You can find it on ogrose.com, and thank you for your time.